Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the science of choice. We'll be digging into the key psychological frameworks and the tools, like the decision-making style scale, that researchers actually use to figure out how we make up our minds.
So let me ask you something right off the bat. Think about the last really big decision you had to make. Did you map it all out with a spreadsheet, weighing the pros and cons, or was it more of a gut feeling, a sudden sense of this is the right way to go? Just hang on to that example as we go through this. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start by defining what a decision even is. Then we'll look at the major theories behind it. After that, we'll zoom in on a specific tool for measuring it, see how an experiment with it works, and finally, we'll talk about why any of this matters in the real world.
Okay, let's dive into our first section. You see, before psychologists could seriously study decision-making, they had to agree on what they were even talking about, because it's way more than just picking between A and B. It's a really fundamental cognitive process.
I think this definition by Lopez from back in '77 really nails it. Look at the key words here. It's a resolution of a conflict, and it's a commitment to action. And you're doing this when things are uncertain, complex, and maybe even when you're not being totally rational. It's not just a choice, it's about solving an internal puzzle.
So with that definition in our back pocket, let's move on. We can now explore some of the major psychological theories that try to explain this incredibly complex process.
The earliest theories were pretty straightforward. Rational choice theory, for example, basically assumed that we all act like little economists, logically calculating every cost and benefit to get the absolute best deal. It's a neat idea, but it doesn't quite capture how messy real humans are.
And this is where things got really interesting. Kahneman and Tversky came along and completely changed the game with their prospect theory. Their big insight, loss aversion. Basically, we hate losing way more than we enjoy winning. The pain of losing $50 feels so much worse than the joy of finding $50, and that bias has a huge influence on our choices.
This idea flows perfectly into what we now call dual process theory. Just think of it like this. You've got two different systems running in your brain at all times. System 1 is your gut reaction. It's fast, emotional, automatic. Then you've got System 2, which is your slow, careful, logical thinking. So many of our decisions are really a tug-of-war between these two systems.
So, what did all these big ideas lead to? Well, researchers started to realize that our choices aren't just random. We tend to fall into consistent, predictable patterns. In psychology, we call these decision-making styles.
Back in 1995, Scott and Bruce came up with a really popular model that identified 5 of these styles. You've got rational, which is all about logic, intuitive, which is about feelings, dependent, where you lean on others, avoidant, well, that's pretty self-explanatory, and spontaneous for those quick, on-the-spot choices. As you look at these, do any of them sound familiar?
Okay, it's one thing to say these styles exist, but for science, that's not enough. We need a way to actually measure them. And that brings us to our third section and a specific tool designed to do just that.
So let's talk about the Decision-Making Style Scale, or the DMSS for short. It was developed back in 2005 by Dr. Noorjahan and Ganahar, and it's essentially a standardized test designed to figure out a person's main approach to making choices.
Now, these numbers on the screen are super important. For any psychological test to be worth its salt, it has to be two things: reliable, meaning it gives consistent results, and valid, meaning it actually measures what it says it's measuring. With scores well above 0.85, the DMSS is considered a really robust and trustworthy tool for researchers.
The scale itself is pretty comprehensive. It's got 48 questions that look at how you make decisions across these 4 different life areas you see here. And based on all your answers, the scale figures out which of 3 core decision-making styles is your go-to.
So, unlike that 5-style model we just saw, the DMSS boils things down to one of these 3. You've got the routine style, which loves structure and established methods. Then there's compromise, which is all about balancing different perspectives. And finally, heuristic, which is about relying on intuition and those mental shortcuts we all use.
All right, this leads us to the fun part, the experiment itself. How is the DMSS actually used in a controlled lab setting? Let's take a look.
The procedure is very standardized, and that's by design. First, the experimenter establishes a good rapport to make the participant feel at ease. Then, they give them the 48-item questionnaire with very clear instructions. The person fills it out on their own, and afterward the responses are scored to figure out their dominant style.
And to make sure the results are legit, there are a bunch of really important precautions. Things like making sure the room is quiet and free of distractions, keeping everything confidential, and scoring the test exactly the same way every single time. All these controls are vital to get good, clean, scientific data. This brings us to our final, and maybe most important section. So what? Why does it even matter what someone's decision-making style is? What can you do with this information?
Well, it turns out the applications are incredibly broad. In education, it can help us understand how a student solves problems. In the business world, you could use it for leadership training. In a clinical setting, it might help identify patterns linked to anxiety. It's a surprisingly versatile tool across all kinds of different fields.
So let's circle all the way back to the question I asked at the very beginning. After everything we've covered, which of these three styles, routine, compromise, or heuristic, do you think best describes how you operate when the stakes are high? It's a fascinating question that gives you a little window into how your own mind works.